In. All right, welcome everybody to Provo Municipal Council meeting, our work session on Tuesday, September 1st, 2020. The time is 1:32 p.m. This meeting will be conducted entirely via electronic means. On August 10th, 2020, in accordance with Utah Code 52-4-2074, Council Chair George Handley determined that conducting meetings of the Municipal Council with an anchor location, such as the Municipal Council Chamber, presents a substantial risk to the health and safety of those who may be present there. And these are the facts upon which I, Mr. Handley, made this determination. Utah has been in a declared state of emergency due to COVID-19 since March 6, 2020, a disease outbreak which the World Health Organization has characterized as a pandemic. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention state that COVID-19 is easily spread from person to person between people who are in close contact with one another. The disease spreads through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks, and it may be spread by people who are asymptomatic. Federal, state, and local authorities have recommended that individuals limit public gatherings, wear face masks, and follow social distancing guidelines. Notwithstanding that Utah generally and Utah County specifically have been moved to the low-risk yellow phase, reported COVID-19 cases in Provo continue to rise at a high rate, more than 100 cases per day, 14-day average. Physical distancing measures will be difficult to set up and maintain in the Provo City Municipal Chamber. And additionally, the chair of the governing board of the Redevelopment Agency of Provo City has determined that its meetings are subject to the same risks and has adopted the same procedures as the Municipal Council. This meeting will be available to the public for live broadcast and on-demand viewing at youtube.com/Provo City Council. Because this meeting is being broadcast live on the web on the Provo City YouTube channel, where it will also be available for on-demand viewing. I remind participants to mute your microphone when not speaking so as to minimize the potential for background noises and conversations to be picked up, recorded, and broadcast for all to hear. I will begin by stating the names of those present in this meeting who will be participating. I am George Handley. I'm joined by my as chair. I'm joined by Vice Chair David Harding, fellow council members Bill Fillmore, Dave Sewell, Dave Shipley, Travis Hoban, and Shannon Ellsworth. We're also joined by our Executive Director Cliff Strachan, our council attorney, Brian Jones, the city's chief administrative officer, Wayne Parker, deputy mayor, Isaac Paxman, and Dixon Holm, assistant chief administrative officer for the city. We excuse Mayor Michelle Kafusi, who's absent due to a family obligation. And we're also joined by various staff who are assisting us with this meeting. We'll begin by an opening prayer, and I will gladly offer that prayer. Our dear Heavenly Father, we are grateful to be gathered together. We're grateful and humbled by the responsibilities that we have. We are mindful today of everyone in this community. We know that there are many anxieties and concerns and frustrations in this community, and we pray that Thou will bless us all to be wise, to listen to one another, and to learn from one another, and to keep our bonds of affection strong, that we might be able to not only combat the worst impacts of this pandemic, but also its social and political and emotional impacts by showing kindness and charity and concern for others. We pray for those who are on the front lines dealing with this pandemic, and we of course pray also for all those who may be vulnerable and are ill. We pray for all of the many issues and concerns of this community and ask for Thy wisdom and guidance, that we might be instructed when we are in error and inspired when we are able to do what is right or what would make a difference in our community. We ask for Thy Spirit to accompany us now in the name of Thy beloved Son, Jesus Christ. Amen. All right. Although this is a public meeting, only the presenters and those invited by the chair may speak or ask questions unless otherwise invited by the chair. Please use the raise hand function to indicate that you would like to speak, and wait to speak, if you will, until called on by the council chair. We'll start with item number 1, which is the discussion of possible amendments to Chapter 9.25 COVID-19 response. As I indicated at our meeting on Thursday, we would be having this discussion today. I indicated on Thursday that we would also be inviting administration to offer any feedback or share anything or any information they would like to share. And Wayne Parker has asked for, I think, about 20 minutes of our discussion to present some information that should be relevant to our discussion about the city's continuing educational efforts. So we'll turn some time over to Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Hopefully I'm unmuted now. So John, if we can have you share the document I sent you just a bit ago. My intent will be to just run through this outline of our proposed awareness campaign relative to the Mask Up Provo effort. So we're excited to have the opportunity to share the concept with you. In general, let me just highlight as the screen's coming up that it is our intent to do what we've termed a lighthearted motivational campaign to raise awareness of the importance of mask wearing, as well as making as a key priority to increase the percentage of our residents and visitors in the community that are actually wearing masks. Our intent is to really make an effort at changing behavior. So the key campaign goals that we've talked about are to, number 1, present a unified front on community safety, and unified front meaning all parts of the city organization as well as all the elected officials, that we would create a fun, non-political tone. We're not going to focus on wear a mask because it's the law. We're going to focus on wear a mask because it's the right thing to do. We intend to create partnerships with a number of our partners in this arena, and I'll talk a little bit about that. And then to think about both internal and external education initiatives, meaning internal to the city organization and again, our partners, and external to the broader community. So we're going to walk through this general idea of the community-wide campaign with a focus on targeting some very specific audiences, those being particularly students and businesses. So on the screen now, you're seeing the first couple of pages of this document. So I want to start on the bottom part of the first page. John, if you can scroll up just a smidge, about targeting students. We think this is a really important target audience for us, in part because students and young adults many are coming to town for the first time since last spring, whether they were students here before or whether this is their first year at BYU and UVU. And we're going to talk specifically about BYU and our outreach there, but it applies equally to our students and young adults that are associated with UVU or other higher education institutions. So our first tactic is a partnership with what's called the Y Digital Agency. This is a faculty-run and student-administered digital marketing agency on campus in the School of Communications. We've met with their staff several times over the last week or so in an effort to better understand a strategy around reaching this really important demographic to us. So we are entering into an agreement today, a scope of work agreement, for this agency to essentially run our digital media and marketing efforts on the Mask Up Provo campaign. So they'll be working through various social media platforms, We'll be doing some Google ads. We'll look at influencers and those who are influential in this demographic group to share the message of the importance of using masks to protect others around us and embrace the community value in Provo that we take care of each other. Fortunately, in part of our agreement with the Y Digital Agency, they'll be waiving their usual agency fee so that all of the taxpayer dollars we put into this equation will really be involved in the specific outreach, advertising, and other aspects of this. Secondly, we are talking about doing what we've referred to as a mobile app pledge. We're working with BYU now to see if we can leverage the Healthy Together app, which is being used by students, faculty, and staff on campus. If that works, great. If not, we'll do our own. But the concept would be that students or others would essentially take a voluntary pledge to always wear masks off campus because it's the right thing to do. And if they use the app to agree to the pledge, then they will be eligible to receive some cool and trendy swag from us, including one of several designs for an effective mask in such a way that, for example, they could enter into the app, give us their contact information so that we can keep engaging them in the campaign. And in the meantime, they would show up at a booth on or off campus or at a local retailer or somewhere in Provo near campus where they could show the app. Whoever is there would essentially enter a code on the app which would say, "We got your message," and then would let them choose a functional face mask for them to use in the effort. We might consider some other swag as well, including T-shirts or other things that might help encourage participation. And then we're intending to do a lot of cross promotion through the established channels at both BYU and UVU, so that we're all sharing graphics and messaging, so it's consistently used through the channels. This helps with branding and trying to get a significant level of acceptance involved here. Secondly, as we're talking about social media content, our focus will be on infographics, questions and surveys, partner posts, storytelling, citizen-submitted content, quotes, curation from our resident experts, including the university, Intermountain Healthcare, BYU, Utah County Health, and others, to, again, leverage activities so that we're not reinventing the wheel, but that we're taking advantage of good opportunities. We'll also have a traditional media focus that will focus on newsletter articles, direct mail, advertising in publications. We intend to purchase some billboard space in highly visible locations coming into and Provo on all of our major corridors, including I-15 and again, local electronic billboard opportunities. We've worked at the Provo Town Center Mall that's going to give us some space on their digital sign on I-15, which again will give us a pretty good bright line exposure daytime and nighttime for that outreach. John, can I get you to scroll down to the third page of this document, if you would? And as John's going there, so we'll also work on earned media, so kind of news media outreach by reaching out to television, radio, and print media for whether it's in this case, earned media would be participating in past, being part of a talk show, participating in podcasts, those kinds of things. We'll reach out to traditional influencers in our community, including our neighborhood chair network. And then finally is kind of an increased signage effort. So at the entrance to city facilities, we'll do a lot more in terms of making sure people understand that face coverings are required by city ordinance. And you see a couple of mock-ups of the signs that we intend to use in our city facilities. And then we'll also provide printable signs for businesses similar to these that could be used by the business community. So all they have to do is print them and attach them to their doorways. We'll work on some University Avenue street banners. So we have the overhead banner opportunities at several locations on University Avenue that we'll take advantage of. We'll provide some yard signs encouraging people to mask up, and we'll make those available to residents and businesses who'd like to have them in an effort to join in the promotional effort. And then we'll work on, we've got some agreements we have to work through on our existing streetlight banners through downtown, on 3rd South, on Cougar Boulevard, University Parkway, looking at some opportunities. If we can find available space that's not already committed, we'll try to do some of those street side banners as well as the overhead banners. And then finally, as you'll see at the bottom of that page, we anticipate that our campaign cost to do all this is about $100,000. Our intent is to use CARES Act funds for this purpose. It's one of those purposes that would be very, very clearly articulated as a permitted use of CARES Act funds to encourage safe and healthy practices in light of the pandemic. So that gives you just a thumbnail of what we're talking about. Again, still some meat to add to the bones in terms of this outline, but we wanted to let you know where we were and anxious to see if you have any feedback for us that might be helpful as we add some more, again, practical application and specific ideas associated with this very aggressive campaign. So with that, I'm open to any questions. I appreciate Chair Handley giving us an opportunity to share some thoughts with you today.
Mr. Sewell.
Sorry. Just as far as quick feedback, I just want to say I think this is terrific. I'm really excited. I don't have any specific suggestions, but just thank you very much.
Yeah, we're excited about the opportunity to make this happen effectively.
Any other questions for Mr. Parker before we continue our? Yes, Mr. Harding.
I just want to share my kudos as well. This sounds like a great start, and looking forward to seeing it in place.
Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, as well. I like to focus on, the educational piece and such. I know that there's a pending referendum, and so the city's plan is to move forward with this campaign, regardless of what might happen with a referendum or a lawsuit or anything like that, until instructed otherwise, right?
That is correct. Yeah, and again, as I mentioned at the beginning, the idea of trying to focus on the legal ordinance aspect of this, we think the ordinance will be helpful to certain segments of our community in terms of wanting to comply with the law, regardless of whether the law is in effect at any point going forward. But we do think the stronger and more easily reinforced message is just one of doing the right thing, regardless of whether there's an ordinance in place or not. And so again, in order to maintain kind of the engaging attitude around this, we think it's not that we want to downplay the ordinance. We'll certainly use it in the campaign efforts, but I think putting a lot of emphasis on it's doing the right thing because it's the right thing to do, and it's what we do in Provo. We support each other. We live in great neighborhoods. We look out for one another, and wearing a face covering is the optimal way right now to look out for each other. So that would be our approach, regardless of what happens with the referendum going forward.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wonder, and maybe you're the analyst or specialist at BYU will help with this, but will citizens see sincerity and credibility in these efforts?
Well, we certainly hope so. That's our intent. I think, we met with our directors today and talked about the importance of modeling the behavior among our city employees and our city facilities. We intend to do all that we can do to ensure that the ordinance is well and appropriately enforced. And again, our hope is that we'll, by modeling behavior and continuing the ongoing effort and keeping this issue in front of our residents and our student population, we hope it will communicate sincerity and honesty of intent.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Parker. I think it's great. I think from my understanding, the really healthy and robust combination of an ordinance and an educational campaign has a great potential for promoting more compliance. So thank you.
You bet.
All right. So let's turn to the discussion about any potential amendments or tweaks that we would want to make to the ordinance. And I think maybe in the interest of time, as we've discussed this, that it would be best to talk first about the individual fee that I know Mr. Fillmore has raised concerns about. Mr. Fillmore, do you want to start by making any introduction to your concerns?
I would. Thank you very much. First, I certainly welcome the administration's initiative with respect to this expanded citywide and enhanced education effort. I think that's important. It has been from the beginning. So let's give them all the help we can to make that successful. As I indicated at our last council meeting, I feel strongly that certain amendments to our COVID-19 ordinance need to be addressed and right away. There's too much misinformation out there, leading to too much anger and divisiveness. I spent most of the weekend pondering the ordinance. I've been stewing on this for really a couple of weeks, but like you, all of you responding to many emails, texts, and calls from both sides of the debate. The amendments I proposed in my memo, which was circulated yesterday, were offered for the purpose of clarifying the intent of the ordinance in order to avoid interpretive problems, while also making it a bit easier to swallow in hopes of avoiding both litigation and a referendum effort. I voted, in fact, to override the veto, even though I had reservations, because I was assured we would have the opportunity to discuss those proposed amendments. So that is happening now. I think I want to say that I very much appreciate the comments we all received this morning, a response to my proposed amendments from our council attorney, Brian Jones. I felt that what I had tried to do with my memo and my proposed language on the amendments was to raise issues and concerns where I thought the ordinance was flawed. But I thought there were half a dozen or more clarifications that would make it a better ordinance, with the intent of discouraging a referendum or litigation. But now we're in the soup with the referendum, and hopefully if we make some changes that are appropriate, it would discourage support for the referendum. And so I appreciate what Brian did. My recommendation this afternoon, would be, in order to save time, we don't have time to discuss everyone line by line, but I would be just fine with accepting Brian's advice on each point. That is, deleting my proposed changes where he does not feel they are necessary because they're clearly covered elsewhere, and allowing our council attorney to work up improved language based on the suggestions he concurs in as being helpful clarifications. If we could reach a consensus on that, then I think a discussion and vote tonight on those improvements would be helpful. Obviously, we don't have the time to go over them one by one, but that would be my recommendation. If the council could acknowledge that those things that I recommended and Brian felt also would be helpful, we would direct him to work up some amendment language and have that ready for us to discuss tonight. I don't think it's something we want to delay on for another 2 weeks. So let's have a discussion on that first, and then I would reserve the rest of the time to discussing the larger issue, which is the individual mandate penalty.
Well, I thought we had agreed that we were going to discuss the individual mandate first.
Well, I think it's all part of my recommendations for improving the ordinance. And I thought that we could handle this first if there was a consensus to allow Brian to work on the language pursuant to his recommendations in his response this morning.
Mr. Shipley?
Yeah, I'd like to talk about the fee and focus on that, but I'd also like to, I think most of the other things were wording for me. I don't think they changed the intent of what we were trying to do. But one other item I think we need to address here in this work meeting is there was a suggestion to change the numbers for the outdoor versus indoor. And I don't think that's a wording, I think that's a material change to the actual ordinance itself. So those were the two things, the fee and then the number indoor versus outdoor that I thought, independent of all the other wording changes, did actually change the ordinance substantively. And I think we need to address both of them in this meeting.
Ellsworth?
I'm just trying to find all of these notes. I think they were in our email and not in our packets, right?
That's correct. Well, I think I think, Mr. Fillmore, I would still prefer that we talk about the individual fee first, because I think that's the issue that's probably the most pressing. In my judgment, the other concerns are worthy of our attention, but in the interest of time,
Okay.
I think it might be preferable to tackle that bigger issue first, and then if we have time, we can look at those other issues.
Okay, that'll be fine. As council is aware, I've raised this concern off and on for the last few weeks. Based on my inquiries, I am not aware of any other city in the state of Utah that has an individual mask mandate with a penalty. Salt Lake, for example, their focus of their ordinance is on the business community. That's how it's directed. And they have a county health department, which is charged with whatever enforcement there is there. Only Provo, to my knowledge, intends to impose a penalty on individuals who do not wear a mask where the ordinance says is appropriate. I think that is the primary source of the anger and divisiveness in our city. It also creates a significant problem for our police department. It burdens them with potentially additional enforcement, which they are really reluctant to do because they value the trust relationship they have with our citizens. It creates the potential for flooding 9/11 with tattletales who wants to complain about their neighbors and then have the police go enforce the ordinance on people. It creates a myriad of enforcement issues, and the administration has expressed a reluctance to be involved in enforcing the mandate against individuals. I think it makes more sense for us to have a mandate, against large groups do not mask up, and the penalty is appropriate there. But I just extremely reluctant to see us pursue a penalty on that individual mandate. I'm okay with leaving the language in that expresses a strong statement urging our citizens to wear masks in situations, but I think the enforcement issue all by itself is problematic. And so my recommendation would be to strip out the one penalty line, the $55 fine on individuals, and spare our police and administration the headaches from the enforcement issues that will arise from that.
All right, thank you, Mr. Fillmore. Any discussion of Mr. Fillmore's proposal? Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I appreciate Mr. Fillmore's concern. I only got these notes about 24 hours ago, so I haven't had time to thoroughly review, I think, a dozen emails and interactions on this conversation or on this topic. So I don't feel totally prepared to make a decision today. I do see that this has been a very divisive issue for our city, and I really hate that. I wish that our city could be more unified, and I don't think that us tweaking the ordinance will fix that. Unfortunately, I think that people are more concerned about, people who are opposed to a mask mandate are primarily concerned with personal freedoms, and us changing the penalty isn't necessarily going to make them less concerned. I wish that would alleviate their fears, but I don't think it will. I feel like their concerns are deeper than just the penalty. And I feel like there's other issues that the city enforces you only on a complaint basis. And that's also divisive between neighbors, right? So if we're going to walk back this ordinance because we don't want a tattletale culture, then there's many, many other ordinances I hope that we also consider so that we don't perpetuate a tattletale culture.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth. Any other discussion? Mr. Harding.
I'm just reviewing the research that we received. How long ago was that? Back on the 18th of August, where it looks at the 3 different jurisdictions in Utah that have some sort of mandate. I just stopped at the second one, Logan. It looks like the notes here show that enforcement is primarily through education and warnings, but law enforcement is law enforcement directed to provide verbal reminders and only cite for repeat or egregious violations. Citations may be administrative or criminal. So I would suggest that even though that there's some directive about education first, there are some punishments, and with it being criminal, I would say far more serious than the maximum civil fine that we have. I'll have to go through this more. I tend to agree with Councilor Ellsworth that this is a bit. Anyway, there's it's a bit rushed, and then also I think Mr. Jones has given us some solid advice generally about the role of the legislature, the role of the ordinances that we pass and how we set a maximum penalty, and then the administration has the discretion to enforce as they see best to balance the various policies and interests of enforcing the policies of the city. So I do feel like it's important that there is an actual penalty for violating the law that is that maximum. So I do not support removing the fine, the civil fine that's attached with this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Harding. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I am eager to get more information on how this is being enforced and enacted and applied. I wonder if Mr. Fillmore would appreciate, and I certainly would appreciate, a report in 2 weeks from our law enforcement officers on what kind of interactions they've had, what kind of calls they've had, any penalties they've used, just any data that they've had with this recent ordinance. I think that would help us make better decisions. What do you think, Mr. Fillmore?
Well, I think, any data on the ordinance, on the virus, on complications arising on enforcement, that would be helpful, but I don't want to put that burden on the police from day one. They really don't want it. Our police department has limited resources, and they have much higher priorities than issuing tickets to individuals not wearing a mask or not wearing it properly. I just think it's an unseemly burden we're potentially putting on them.
Mr. Harding?
Thank you. Just reading through, Bluff allows a $500 fine after verbal warning, and also includes a Class B misdemeanor for people who knowingly violate the ordinance. So that's another jurisdiction that definitely has penalties affixed to the ordinance. And I was not able to find the email, but I believe that we've had a report from Salt Lake County, which has 10 times the population of Provo City. And Salt Lake County, to their knowledge, had not received a single phone call, and had not, there had been no enforcement actions, if I remember that email correctly. So I would say, and then particularly with this administration and their discretion and prudence in enforcing, I think we've been very clear that we're hopeful that this is something that will help educate the public. I mean, everything that Mr. Parker just talked about, encouraging it because it's the right thing to do, and all of that. I think our experience will be more similar to what Salt Lake County has experienced, where there won't be a flood of 911 calls. There will not be an undue burden placed on the police. I think that's probably a better guide to what we will experience in the next 2 weeks.
Mr. Harding, thank you. I stand corrected with respect to Bluff. Appreciate that. I still believe it's poor policy, however, to pass an ordinance where there is no clear intent to enforce it. I think that encourages disrespect for the legal system that we try to establish in our community. Without a clear signal that something is going to be enforced, I just think it sends absolutely the wrong message. But reasonable minds can differ on that.
Mr. Sewell?
Well, I don't think we should be saying that there's no intent to enforce. That was something that Brian cautioned us about. I feel like removing any penalty at all would emasculate that part of the ordinance, and I don't really see what the advantage is to having that in the ordinance as opposed to a resolution if there's no penalty. And I think it really kind of intrudes on the administration's discretion as well. My understanding is that with a penalty, they have complete discretion as to how often they use it or even whether they use it. They might decide that the police have other priorities and they might not ever use it, and that's within their right to decide that. But I don't want to take it off the table in the case of egregious violations that endanger public health. I'm not aware of, well, maybe we do have laws that related to health and safety that have no penalties, but I just don't understand why we would want to do that.
Okay, well, are we, Mr. Fillmore, do you want to make a motion? And I don't know if the other counselors want to weigh in, but we can have a motion and see if there's a second and have any further discussion, and then we can have a vote on this.
Well, yes, let's do it in maybe 3 parts. I would make a motion that we simply delete the penalty line that is the civil fine for an infraction for individuals violating the ordinance.
All right, do we have a second on that motion? Mr. Hoban.
I can second that based on some of the concerns that Bill has.
All right, so any further discussion of this motion? Maybe I'll just add my 2 cents here. I do think this is complicated terrain. I think it's true that it's kind of meaningless to pass an ordinance that is not intended to be enforced. On the other hand, we have seen we crafted an ordinance that's essentially silent on the question of enforcement, and I think that's appropriate, as has been pointed out by others. And so I am confident that the administration and the police chief will be able to determine on their own the way in which they will decide to prioritize and work on this. I think we've already seen a really robust educational campaign that I would assume would be the preferred leading method of enforcement. And I think we have evidence to believe that that actually works extremely effectively. I do think actually taking the fee out is precisely what I think Mr. Fillmore is worried about. It. I think it actually says that we're not serious about this ordinance. So that's where I feel like I'm sort of wrestling with a paradox here a little bit, that I think we're better off leaving that in, but then leaving the administration on their own to determine how they want to go about enforcement. But I think I maybe going back to Mr. Harding's comment, I didn't pull up the email, the report from someone. I do think there was a suggestion that I don't know that I'm pretty sure it wasn't the case that they didn't receive phone calls, but they did say that they'd never given a citation. And what Mayor Wilson told me personally was that the first week or so, there are a lot of questions, as we've already been getting, from individuals about this, that, and the other. But if it's entirely left up to the administration to decide how to address those kinds of questions, my preference would be to leave it up to them so that they can promote the kind of spirit of encouragement that they prefer, to be able to settle those questions in the first week or so, and then people hopefully will move forward and the signage can be put up, and I think we'll find that the change in compliance will be very visible to us. So I think, and I will say, I'm sure there's differences of opinion about this, but what I heard from the Salt Lake County mayor and from her aide who wrote us a formal report, many police officers actually reported that this was an opportunity to build relationships rather than to create more distrust, precisely because it's a sort of educational and positive messaging. So I love the positive messaging of the mayor's campaign, and I think at this point I'm content to leave it as is with regard to this particular question, and let the administration move forward with their plans.
Mr. Hadley, might I just respond to one of your comments?
Sure.
I disagree with your statement that if we pass this particular motion on this particular part of the ordinance, that we're sending the message that we do not take the entire ordinance seriously. That's not my point at all. I believe it's a significant flaw in the ordinance, and if anything, it will give fuel to the referendum effort. I'm very serious about the rest of the ordinance. The group mandates, the mandatory signage in businesses and public buildings, the various exemptions. I think there are some very good things in the ordinance. It's this one thing in particular that I think is, in the end, going to prove counterproductive.
Yeah, that's fair enough, Mr. Fillmore. I didn't mean to imply that you weren't serious about the ordinance. I guess I was just pointing out the paradox that to the degree that we strip the ordinance of any penalty whatsoever, I think we actually make ourselves vulnerable to the accusation that we're passing an ordinance that doesn't look like it's taking itself very seriously. So, and I do think that we did right by not imposing anything more than a civic fee, and that there's no criminalization in this particular.
Right.
And
Very important.
I've said all along that I have very little interest in, dictating what we think is right for this community on the basis of either the threat of a referendum or now an actually filed referendum. I think that's up to the public. It's up to the process that will ensue. But I think we have an obligation to do what we think is right. And knowing the feelings outside and of the individuals who filed that referendum, I'm pretty confident that nothing we would do today would diminish their commitment to pursuing that wholeheartedly. Any other discussion on this motion from the council? All right, then I will call for a vote on this motion from the council, and I will begin with myself. I will vote no. Mr. Harding?
No.
Ms. Ellsworth?
No.
Mr. Fillmore?
Yes.
Mr. Hoban? Sorry, you're muted.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell?
No.
Mr. Shipley?
No.
All right, so that's 5 votes, negative votes, and 2 in favor, so that does not pass. So let's have, yeah, go ahead, Mr. Fillmore.
But I indicated that I would split the motion into 3 parts. So the second part has to do with the item that Mr. Shipley highlighted. This is section 9.25030, subsection 2. It's the concept of increasing, that is elevating the number for the attendance at an outdoor gathering where a face mask would be required from 25 to 50. I never have understood the logic of having that number. It's 50 for indoor gatherings, but only 25 at outdoor gatherings. It seems to me we've received many recommendations to encourage our people to get outside as much as possible, to recreate both for physical and mental health. And I think that number ought to be the same for indoor and outdoor gatherings. And I would make a motion to that effect, that we amend 9.25030 subsection 2 from 25 to 50 individuals.
All right, thank you. Is there a second on that motion?
I'll second that.
Mr. Shipley seconded it. So let's, is there any discussion? Ms. Ellsworth?
Yeah, I think Mr. Jones can clarify that, because that's been a reoccurring concern, but there's nuance between 25 people outdoors and 50 people indoors. Can you clarify that, Mr. Jones?
Sure, I'd be happy to address that. I think I've commented a few times that, as I understand it, the intent of the count, well, first let me back up and say, it's important for those who want to understand the ordinance to understand that the difference between indoor and outdoor public gatherings is not just the number. It is also the role of social distancing in the rule. So as it currently stands, the rule is that indoors, if there are more than 50 people, then the face coverings must be worn regardless of whether social distancing is possible or not. With regard to outdoor public gatherings, the rule is that if there are more than 25 people, face coverings are required only if social distancing is not possible. So strictly from the perspective of Mr. Fillmore, Councilor Fillmore's comments about encouraging outdoors activities, I don't think that, as I understand the council's intent, I don't think anything about the current regime discourages outdoor activities, because as long as social distancing is exercised, there is no upward limit on the size of a group. that could assemble without wearing face coverings, as long as there's social distancing. Having said that, I've expressed, well, let me just back up and say, so that is the distinction between the two. And I think, as I understand the council's original discussion on this, the justification for the different numbers is the different requirements that also apply regarding social distancing. Having said that, I've expressed a personal concern a number of times that the nuance that I just described, and then it took me 2 or 3 minutes to describe, is very poorly understood by the public generally and by most of the people who actually are familiar with the ordinance. And I find it very problematic to try to explain it to people in a way that they understand it. So I get the policy. I think there is a rational policy basis for where the numbers are at, but I think it's very difficult for public consumption.
Mr. Harding.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with what Mr. Jones just explained as the logic behind it. The graphic on the screen, I think, does a pretty good job of explaining it, that what this ordinance actually does, it places no masking or social distancing requirements on private spaces. Outdoor spaces, there's no requirements for groups below 25 and above 25. Masks are required when not socially distancing. Indoor spaces, that's where it starts out, even with one. You know, if social distancing isn't observed, then a mask is required, and that continues all the way up until groups hit 50, in which case masks are required in any circumstance. So I think there is a logic there. I do think that Mr. Jones's concerns about clarity and ease of explanation, you know, we should consider. But I also think that there's, you know, I think there's some sound logic behind what we enacted.
Mr. Hoban.
Yeah, thanks. I have some similar concerns. I do think there is logic behind it, and Mr. Harding's little graph here explains that. But unless that graph's going to be there, or unless we have some way of really clearly explaining it, I think it actually causes more harm than good as far as understanding the ordinance. I think it's better to make it simple and understandable than to add, or, you know, to have that differentiation and make it difficult. I went to a friend's house a couple days ago, and he said, there's a lot about this mandate that doesn't make sense to me. For example, why 50 indoor and 25 outdoor? And I had this pause and say, okay, so here's the difference. I think it just actually does more harm to the mandate than good by having it in there, because people instantly feel like there's some sort of inconsistency in it, which makes them kind of question the ordinance, as opposed to if it were just, you know, 50 outdoor, 50 indoor, but the 50 outdoor allows for social distancing or masks, 50 indoors only masks. I think that's probably a little more clear. I could kind of go either way on this, but I do totally get where Mr. Fillmore is coming from, and I think we probably would benefit from making it 50 and 50, even if there is still a differentiation between mask required regardless, indoor, and mask or social distancing outdoor.
Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, I think my comments have basically been said now, but I think there is some value to making this as simple as possible to understand for people.
Mr. Harding.
I can yield the floor to Ms. Ellsworth if she'd like to go first.
Oh no, you were called on. Go for it.
All right, I just spoke last. Anyway. I totally agree that simplicity is helpful. Here's my struggle. I'm concerned about groups. I mean, I think even 25 is a little bit concerning outdoors if social distancing isn't observed. And so I would be uncomfortable. I'd be uncomfortable with a group of 45, even if they're outside, if they're not socially distanced. And so I don't know if I could support moving that number up to 50. And so the alternative might be to reduce the mass gathering threshold indoors to 25. I think I'd be a little bit more comfortable with that, but that might, I don't know where the rest of the council is on that. It's easier to relax things than it is to make them more strict. But I think we're doing our community a disservice if we're allowing, a fairly large gathering of 45, even if they're outdoors, if they're not socially distancing. So I think that's where I struggle with this. I think there's kind of three options. None of them are necessarily good. The first option is to not make any changes, and I think the clarity suffers from that. We could decrease the indoor threshold to 25. There's some disadvantage to that, or we could increase the outdoor to 50. And again, I worry about, if we're undermining the whole purpose of the mandate if we're doing that. I mean, I don't know where the other councilors fit on this or feel about this, but from the research that I've been reading, that it could be pretty problematic if you have a close encounter of 50 people, so even outdoors. So that's where my concerns are on this, and I don't think I'm really torn on what the best way is for.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I remember how we got to a 25 outdoors. Mr. Harding was concerned that if he went jogging with his friend, that if they weren't social distancing and they weren't wearing masks, that would be a violation of the ordinance. And we said it wasn't a violation because you're doing strenuous activity. But then we talked about putting it at 25. And I think I and maybe Mr. Handley thought, well, how about 10? And it just came out to be 25. And I appreciate what the synopsis that Mr. Harding gave. And I think that it might be more simple if we were to have those two numbers be the same for indoor and outdoor, despite the differences in application. But it's still difficult to explain the differences in application to citizens, regardless of those numbers being the same or different. So I think we have to be comfortable explaining the differences in indoor and outdoor, unless we're going to make the entire ordinance just more simple.
Mr. Fillmore.
My reading of the scientific research on the spreading of the virus seems to repeat the truth over and over, that what we exhale disperses much more quickly and finely outdoors than it does indoors. That's the reason why most of the recommendations seem to tread lightly on outdoor groups. It's not as dangerous as it is when we're exhaling in a confined indoor space. My recommendation is that we change the numbers, change the one number to 50 so we're consistent. That'll be easier for public education. That we strongly recommend. We could even put some verbiage in the ordinance to the effect that social distancing outdoors is strongly recommended in any event, but that we don't penalize them. We don't have a $500 fine here for outdoor gatherings less than 50.
I would agree with the reading of the research there that Mr. Fillmore has outlined. In fact, workplace environments are the most likely places for continuing to spread. So even in a small room of 3 or 4 people, even if they are social distancing, the chances of them infecting each other are much higher than if 20 people are outside. That's one reason why I actually wanted the emphasis the other way around. Maybe there wasn't the appetite for that at the time. I think when we discussed it, That said, I don't know. I sort of feel like I already made peace with this. I've been through some of the parks recently. Just happened to see student groupings. Almost invariably, they're no more than 30 people at a time, but they're frequently gathering already in ways that are probably not advisable. No masks, shaking hands, hugging, standing right next to each other for long periods of time. And even though the risk still is lower there, I go back to the initial principle here, and that is that the ordinance states what the expectations are. And if there's a situation that calls for some education, I'm inclined to want to incentivize that education. I don't think this is going to be penalizing anybody, but I think it would encourage people to be careful about that. But I would have, if we were looking for the same number, I would have preferred it the other way around, and I would have opted for 25 on both, for example, rather than 50 on both. I don't feel super strongly about this, but I'm just not. I don't know. I guess I'm still ambivalent about it. But like I say, I'd kind of made peace with it, and not sure that I'm feeling persuaded to think otherwise. Yeah.
I'll call for a vote.
All right, Mr. Salah has a comment.
I'm reluctant to weaken the ordinance at this point, and I think even more confusing than a difference in the two numbers would be the fact that we're debating and possibly changing the ordinance less than a week after we passed it. I would be much more comfortable with this type of discussion as part of our October 20th review. And it may turn out that we don't even have the option to renew it at that point, or it may turn out that we don't feel like there's a need to renew it at that point. But if it does turn out that we do have the option and feel like it's necessary to renew it, I would prefer that be the time that we make these kinds of changes.
All right. Any further discussion? Not, I'll call for a vote, and I'll begin with you, Mr. Harding.
Gonna reluctantly vote no.
Ms. Ellsworth.
No.
Mr. Fillmore.
Yes.
Mr. Hoban.
Yes.
Mr. Sewell.
No.
Mr. Shipley.
Yes.
And I will vote no. So that is 4 votes against and 3 in favor, with Mr. Shipley, Mr. Hoban, and Mr. Fillmore voting in favor. All right, we have run out of time here, but I know Mr. Fillmore had one more motion to make.
I did. Call it part 3. In my recommendations for what I would call lesser amendments to the ordinance, they included a variety of language where I thought it might be helpful to clarify for the benefit of our citizens, to clarify what the requirement is, to clarify our intent, to avoid some ambiguities, and just to make it work better. And I included in that were some additional individual exemptions that I think needed clarification, such as the exemption for individuals with medical conditions, mental health conditions, or disabilities, is that the mask, that they in and of themselves prevent wearing a mask. I think the bar is too high for that. I think we should have language that that those people are seriously impacted by wearing a face covering, and make that a little easier. Obviously, even if it creates a problem for you, you can wear it. Your condition doesn't prevent wearing the mask, and I thought we ought to make that more clear. Secondly, I received some comments from people involved in high school athletics in particular that suggest that the language ought to be added that individuals who are actively participating in athletic events, training, or practices in the reasonable discretion of their coaches and administrators would be excused from wearing a mask during those activities. Those activities are not always strenuous, however we might define that, and I thought we could leave that to their school administrators and coaches. The other thing is I got some calls on Sunday from some people who read the ordinance and said that they interpret that to mean that someone standing up at the pulpit in a church meeting had to wear a mask. And they did that, but the congregation could not hear them, could not understand them well. And I thought, just based on the practice in my particular church over the summer, that people would understand that we weren't requiring masks at the pulpit, just as we wouldn't require it at the podium of a large gathering, as long as people are social distancing in the congregation or the audience. And I thought that was a clarifying exemption, because apparently we had several church congregations masking their speakers. And I just thought that we ought to make clear that that was certainly not our intent. Certainly not as I understood it anyway. So having said that, I circulated some suggestions yesterday. Our legal counsel responded to that this morning. And my recommendation would be that we direct the council's attorney to propose some language with respect to those clarifications that he thinks would be helpful to the ordinance. Again, none of them are really political, they're just clarifying. That he proposed some language for our consideration, that he goes ahead and he ignores my recommendations where he thinks it's covered elsewhere or unnecessary, but to where he concurs it would be a helpful clarification of the ordinance, that we have him prepare something for our review. I would love to see that come forward tonight, but it's sounding to me like there would not be an appetite for that this evening, but that he put that together sometime soon and circulate it among the council for our discussion, potential vote at our next meeting.
Well, Mr. Fillmore, I am actually, quite open to that discussion. I think given the time, I'm saying this as an individual council member. I'm not trying to exercise council chair prerogative here in saying this, but that my preference would be the latter, I think, because I feel that there's probably a number of reasons, but one would be that one is primarily time. Maybe a second one is that there's some questions in my mind about whether or not those are time urgent, and given the leeway we're trying to give to the administration in terms of their interpretation, I'm still not sure whether or not specifying things is more helpful or starts to move us away from the spirit of the ordinance, which is actually to try to be less heavy-handed in specifying things. But that's my personal preference. I'm open to but I just want to urge everybody to consider that we're already out of time. So I'm a little worried about prolonging this conversation, but since you've made that motion, I certainly want to respect that if there's a second on that motion. Well, actually, I'm not sure what your motion is. Is your motion that you want to discuss and vote on it now, or is your motion that you are saying you are okay with having this come up at our next meeting, for example?
Good. Let me respond to that. My preference certainly would be to discuss a revised ordinance tonight, indicating those amendments that our legal counsel considers viable, because there's nothing in the amendments I proposed, Mr. Chairman, that is heavy-handed. We're not talking about requirements here. We're talking about clarifying the intent of the language and adding some exemptions. It's the opposite of being heavy-handed. It's to lift the hand a bit. And so I would hope that we could do that tonight. But I just, reading between the lines, don't think there's a majority support for that. So I will formally make a motion to this effect, that the council directs our Mr. Jones to prepare amendments along the lines I suggested to the extent he thinks they are viable and not redundant or unnecessary or improper, illegal. And he circulates those preferably sometime this week. We get feedback from the council members and from the administration, and that we have something prepared for discussion and vote at our next meeting.
All right, is there a second on that? Mr. Sewell? Or sorry, Mr. Jones has a comment, but I'm wondering if I can get a second first.
I would be willing to second that if with one question for Mr. Fillmore. Would you be willing to include as part of that motion that we take off the agenda item for tonight? Because I don't think we really have anything to talk about tonight, and I'm...
Well, yes.
Okay, and I'd second.
I will do that for the following reason. It's clear that there's not even close to a majority that's amenable to the amendment I proposed. And secondly, there's no sense having another political hullabaloo at our public meeting tonight where the council's consensus is clear.
Okay.
All right, we have a second from Mr. Sewell. Mr. Jones, did you want to make a comment?
I will very briefly. It may be kind of moot because of where the discussion went. I thought it might be helpful for, since a lot of the motion was granting me some discretion, I wanted to kind of advise on where that discretion is headed at the moment, which is that I have already incorporated proposed changes to the purpose section to make it more general instead of trying to match every detail of the rest of the ordinance, which I think is counterproductive. I've made suggestions about clarifying the term public spaces or publicly accessible areas. I've added language referring people to the exemptions section so that it's more easy to know that there are exemptions. I've added language clarifying the medical exemptions and the athletic exemptions. I'm in the process of adding language about the posting requirement for businesses to clarify exactly what that is, which leaves, by my count on my list, 2 additional items that I think given the nature of the motion, I think I will just indicate that the council should be thinking of, because I may be asking for more guidance on these 2, because I think there was a little bit of a mixed response. And the 2 that I haven't added yet and have questions about are mayoral discretion regarding school activities and the issue of the speakers at organized gatherings, which I don't have questions about the concept, but I have several questions about the implementation. So I'll work on those. Assuming the motion passes, I'll work on those, but we'll probably be looking for some clarification and input from the council in the interim.
Thank you, Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, I know we want to move on. Isn't there something in our ordinance that says you should wear a mask when reasonable and prudent? And if you were speaking and people couldn't hear you, wouldn't it be reasonable and prudent to remove your mask?
No, it's the other way around. It's that you must wear it where social distancing is not reasonable or prudent. Now, I guess, but I suppose you could argue, and the real problem comes with the large public gatherings section, because on its face you could say that the speaker is socially distanced from the rest of the group, and so therefore, because they are socially distancing, an indoor mask face covering is not required under the generic provision of the mandate. The problem is that the face covering and the indoor public gatherings ordinance says if you've got more than 50 people there, it doesn't matter if the social distancing is possible. And so I'm struggling a little bit with how to reconcile the intent of the proposed amendment with the intent of that section.
Well, and I just wonder if we change that slightly, and it's extremely nuanced, will any predominant church in our area re-release a statement that says, oh, but by the way, people who are giving speeches can take their mask off? Because I am aware that a predominant church in the area released a statement to local leaders saying you ought to be wearing masks because it's law in Provo. So I just wonder if that's their interpretation, because they have many lawyers and that's the way they want to interpret it and apply it in their buildings. And if they're really going to change that or reissue a statement if we change this in a tiny way.
Well, I think that I have an email from Hannah that I received a few minutes ago that suggests to me that this is a fairly high profile issue, that there are some questions being asked on a fairly high level right now. I think any action taken on that probably would be reflected in policy changes. And I think that right now, I would say my interpretation of the way the ordinance is currently written is that it would be required for speakers if there are more than 50 people in the building.
I suppose, Mr. Jones, I would suppose that the easy way to solve the problem is to indicate that in those circumstances, it is permissible if the speaker is socially distanced.
Could I?
I've indicated in my previous comments that's I think acceptable with this caveat. But what I struggle to understand the logic of is once we introduce the principle of social distancing into a large public gathering, then why doesn't social distancing apply to the entire gathering and not just to the speaker?
Well, it could with indoor gatherings.
Well, if what's proposed then is to change indoor public gatherings to only require masks where social distancing isn't possible, then that's completely logically consistent and would solve the problem. But I don't think that's the intent of the council at this time.
No. I mean, the focus was trying to solve what I thought was a fairly straightforward problem. Why don't we work on wordsmithing that one a little bit?
And that was my proposal. All I was trying to say was that that's one that I think is more complicated than the initial proposal.
Fair enough.
I'd like to recommend that we move on. I would say that I think I speak for the entire council that we have every intention of allowing reasonable judgments on these things. I don't think it's in our interest to be dictating that too strictly. So I don't anticipate that there would be any appetite for enforcing anything of that kind. And the administration's approach to this will be prudent and I'm sure judicious, and that we can come to allow individual institutions to make their own call on that. And Mr. Sewell, we've got a motion and we need to pass or take a vote on that, but go ahead, Mr. Sewell.
I think Brian asked for feedback on those two, so I just wanted to give mine real quick. On the one with the mayoral discretion, and by the way, I haven't had time to really study this much, but I was a little confused by that one. I wasn't sure what problem we were trying to solve, and it wasn't clear to me what the effect would be. So that's my only comment on that one. And then the other one, as far as the speaker teacher situation, I think we'll have to be really careful on that, because we do have a lot of speaker teacher situations where the class is within 6 feet or close to 6 feet, and could be and I believe in most of those cases the teachers are wearing masks because of the policy of their university or the school board or whatever. And so I think we need to be a little careful on that one, that potentially putting a large class of students at greater risk. But maybe there is some point, as if you're socially distanced beyond a certain point, that we could make an exception for the speaker or teacher. Or the other way is possibly clarifying the exemption for hearing impaired if it's believed that it will cause a problem for the speakers and listeners to understand the speaker or teacher. Then maybe that's another way to approach it. Those are my thoughts.
So in the interest of Chair Handley's desire to move on, I will say my actual only intent was to say that I'm going to be asking for feedback.
Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine. But given that the motion is not to address this today, but to address it in the future, I'll be seeking that feedback offline. I will comment with regard to what you just said, that one of my concerns or confusions about, again, the intent and where the council is at with what the best public safety policy is with regard to this specific question is, if the science that you're relying upon says that air droplets hang in the air for a given amount of time, is a speaker really socially distanced if somebody else stands up in the exact same space mere moments later? Is there, but anyway, that's just one of the questions that I'm going to be posing, I suppose.
And I would just say at BYU, if you're requiring social distancing but you don't require masks from the teacher, that can get a little bit complicated because the front row is right in front of the teacher. That was my experience yesterday in teaching. We are required to use masks when we teach, and we use microphones to help with the sound difficulty. But anyway, okay, so we're moving forward here. We've got a motion on the table, and I'll call for a vote on that motion. I'll begin with Ms. Ellsworth.
And remind me, the motion is just for Mr. Jones to clarify certain elements and
Yes.
present us with language?
Right, to bring this back to discussion at our next meeting and to take off of the agenda for this evening, discussion of amendment.
A work meeting or council meeting?
Well, I assume it would
Oh,
be
My
potentially,
intent was both.
if we're looking at potential amendments, we would need to have it on the evening agenda. We could always vote to continue it at the work session, but we could have it as a potential item that evening.
Yeah, the motion is for Mr. Jones to come back with text, not just concepts.
Right, that we would actually vote on.
Thank you.
All right, I'll vote yes.
Okay, Mr. Fillmore,
Yes.
Mr. Hoban,
Yes.
Sewell,
Yes.
Mr. Shipley,
Yes.
I will vote yes. Mr. Harding?
Yes.
Okay, that voting is unanimous. All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Fillmore, for your patience and understanding. Everyone else, and navigating those questions, and we'll continue that conversation. Appreciate it. We'll move on to item number 2. We're already 15 minutes behind, so this will be a presentation regarding the fiscal 2023. We do not have a closed meeting today, so, as we thought we might. So we do actually have a little bit of flexibility here, but we'll go with, so I'm not telling Mr. Borgett not to take the time he needs here. We have a presentation regarding the fiscal 2023 third quarter financial report from Mr. John Borgett, our Director of Administrative Services, and it's good to have you with us, Mr. Borgett.
Thank you, Chair Handley. There's actually 2 items that I wanted to discuss with the council. One of the things that's kind of unique about the third quarter report is it ends on March 31st, which at that time we had only had a couple weeks really where we'd been significantly impacted by COVID-19. And so it's kind of interesting to go through and review the numbers prior to COVID-19, but I also wanted I've prepared kind of, because I thought it was something that the council would be really interested in, is just kind of the overall impact or my sense and feeling on the revenues for the fiscal year, which includes 3 months in addition to this of COVID-19, and it kind of gives the council an idea of where I anticipate revenues to come out at the end of the year. So if it's all right, John, I'd like to review that first. And then after I'm through with that, I'll be happy to go through the quarterly report, or if I want to just see if there's questions, and so we can make that optional. But I think this first is really important. And so I've looked really closely at the revenues as we're where our fiscal year ends June 30th. And so we're still getting some of our information because it takes a couple of months to get some of the information from the state. But we're really close, and so I feel really close. So I'm expecting that we're going to be about 1.5 million down in revenues for the general fund. And if we go to the second slide, this just kind of gives you a breakdown on a couple of the key areas. We have received all 12 of our distributions from the state on sales tax, so we know how that's going to end up. And we were actually 826,000 over our budgeted number. As we looked at the COVID impact, hasn't really significantly impacted us on sales tax. We're up over 5% for the year. The state as a whole was up as well. We think there may have been some shift as some of our the Sam's Club and our online sales tax revenue and other items seemed to kind of offset some of the other areas like restaurant revenues that were down. And so the good news is that we were up in sales tax. The other thing that's good is when we budgeted our sales tax for fiscal 21, our sales tax number that we came up with was approximately, well, it was the same we had the year before, because we projected 0 growth. And so I feel like we may still see some impacts from COVID, and particularly as people spent the money that they received from the government for COVID, that may have had some impact. But overall, I still feel like we should be in a good position on our sales tax projection for fiscal 21. Our fire revenues, which was primarily ambulance billing, was up about 300,000. Parks and Recreation, which really resulted from the rec center being closed for a period of time, as well as the fact that even now, as we're up and we're fully operational, it's not the same as it was pre-COVID, because we have spacing limitations and other things. And so a lot of that, though, did come from when we were closed for a month and a half or so. But that's where our biggest decrease was. Also, with franchise fees and transfers in, that primarily came from energy. When we get our franchise fees come from all utilities that operate within the city, and the biggest utility as far as revenues go and as far as our franchise fees is energy. And even prior to COVID, if you went back and looked at the quarterly report, which we can do afterwards if we have the time and if we choose to, you'll see that we were trending down. And that can be from a number of things, but it can be related to weather. It can be related to overall usage. The other thing that impacted us in the last quarter, as we were down pretty significantly, was the fact that we had businesses that weren't open, or we had BYU that wasn't in session. So some of those things really impacted those transfers as well as the franchise fees. And then the other category of about 472,000, which makes up a number of different areas. But I just wanted to keep fairly high level. So that's what makes up our $1.5 million. Then if we go to the next slide, one of the things that Mayor Kafusi did, which I thought was really prudent and really forward thinking, is we got the directors together right as COVID was starting to take its impact at the end of March, early April, and asked the general fund departments to go through and identify areas in their operating budgets that we could reduce their budget and set aside money for the potential decrease in revenues. And as they went through and did this, we came up with $800,000. And so what we did is we set that money aside so that it was no longer available to spend in the budget, and that money was set aside to help offset that decrease. And so that's over half of the 1.5 million that we're down. So we still have about 700,000. Parks and Recreation, as they closed their facilities and had a number of programs, sports programs and things that just couldn't be offered during that time, they reduced their expenditures by not having to pay for supplies, not having to pay for for their people to do these things. And so there was some significant savings in Parks and Recreation as well, and their operating expenses to help offset that $1.3 million decrease. And then also in other departments, I am confident that we'll have adequate operational savings to offset the decrease in revenues of that additional 700,000. So what I wanted the council to know now, because I know it's something that's on your minds and something that's really important, is that these numbers aren't audited, but confident that we're in a good place for fiscal 20 for the general fund, and that we're going to be able to, we're going to have the adequate funding to offset that $1.5 million revenue shortfall as a result of COVID-19. So any questions relating to our fiscal 20 year-end numbers as we look at them prior. I would also mention that we're going into our audit starting in about 3 weeks. And so that we'll have the audit numbers audited, but just kind of wanted to give you a peek at that. So any questions from the council members?
Mr. Shipley.
More of a comment. I just am really impressed with our ability to juggle what's been going on this last year as a city, and you know, as somebody new to city politics, really surprised, you know, that we can handle the impact from that I thought would be there from sales tax in regards to COVID. Would it be fair to say, John, that a significant boost this year, this last fiscal year, was that internet sales tax piece of the puzzle that really wasn't budgeted prior to the last fiscal year, and so it really kind of made up the difference maybe of some of the drawdown in sales tax?
It was a really big impact. We keep track of our top 50 businesses, and the internet sales now are in the top 5, where a few years ago we had 0, and then it's kind of creeped up. But yeah, that's a good observation, and that has had a big impact.
So Provo, keep buying things online. It helps out.
That's right.
Mr. Sewell.
Oh, I just wanted to say, John, like you said, I have been worried about this and was kind of expecting something that would be a little bit more negative. So I'm just really happy that we're in such a good place for now.
Mr. Harding.
Ditto. Great job, administration. Great job, employees across Provo, really stepping up and providing the services we provide with even greater efficiency, provide more value to our residents. Just so I'm clear on, well, I guess first quick question, clarification. So are you saying internet sales as a group is now in our top 5, or that there are some individual online retailers that have made it into our top 5?
Yeah, I have to be careful and be confidential so I don't mention any names, but yeah, we have seen specific retailers on that provide internet sales that are now collecting sales tax that have had a big impact. And I think the other thing that we see, and I'm sure most of you have seen if you bought things online, is that not 100% are collecting sales tax, but a very high percentage are now, and so that has been impacting us. The other thing I would say that's helped us statewide, Utah has. I went to and I had an economist speak on the state of the Utah economy as well as the national economy related to COVID, and Utah has handled it much better than the national economy has. And part of our distribution comes from point of sale, 50% of it. The other half comes from the overall, our population as it relates to the rest of the state. And I would just say that we're up about 5.5%, but the state as a whole is up even a little bit more. And so it's also good that we're in a good state that's well managed, and a state that's diversified and has a number of businesses that continue to do well. And so I think all of that's related. The other thing that I would just mention is that for the council and as far as anyone else, we're not through the woods. COVID's here for a while. And so I would just say cautiously optimistic that we're going to be able to weather the storm in fiscal 21, but definitely there's still some unknowns, and we continue to not know what the winter's going to be like. And so as far as to our employees and to the council, we're not through the woods, but the good news is it's looking like for fiscal 20 that we're going to come through okay by some of the things that we've done.
And just real quick clarification, if I understand your presentation, that means that the rainy day fund that we've been building up over the years will actually not go down in this current, the fiscal year that just ended.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Ms. Ellsworth.
Yes. I'm curious if there's any kind of analysis or prediction of what could happen if BYU were to close and go to online classes only, what impact would that have on our revenues? Any idea?
Well, I think it would definitely be a negative impact. I think we definitely were impacted when that happened, after March, and when classes didn't continue for a period of time. It's hard to know the full impact, but definitely there would be an impact that's related to that.
Yeah, it seems like that was, that was in combination, of course, with the stay-at-home order, which was maybe the more devastating blow. I don't know if it's possible to differentiate the two, but it does seem unclear at this point that, BYU is officially going online as of Thanksgiving, but it is unclear what would happen with the students if the campus were to shut down. In other words, I think among the options that BYU has is, going online but not sending everybody home, for example, or going online and letting people go home who would prefer to do it at home, but other people who would prefer to stay would stay. So I think that's all still very much up in the air. And hopefully, of course, if we can keep things under control, we can keep businesses open and the economy flowing. But that's great news, Mr. Borgett. Thank you.
I would make one other clarification on fund balance. We have right now in our state calculation on fund balance, it includes both basically our unreserved or undesignated fund balance, which is just money that's ready to spend, and then it also included our encumbered fund balance, and those two were combined for our state level. This year, our encumbered balance is going to be, and as we come back to the council to share with them our recommended carryovers in 2 weeks, you'll see that carryover list is going to be much smaller this year than it has been in the past, just because we're really concerned and we want to make sure that we're very conservative on what we carry over so that money is available. And so with that number being less, there still may be some decrease in the total uncommitted and encumbered balance, but the overall hit from the return will be fine. But just want to make sure that, as you aware, if we go from 25 to 23 and that could happen just because of what we're doing with our encumbrances. So I just want to make you aware of that.
All right, thank you. All right, well, thank you, Mr. Borgett. We appreciate you as always. We'll move on to item number 3, which is a presentation regarding an update on the Provo City Center project and redevelopment. This will be presented by Scott Henderson, Director of Parks and Recreation, Brian Macbeth, Layton Construction, and Brent Tippett from VCBO Architecture. It's good to have you all with us.
Thank you, Chair and Council members. We'll also be joined, batting cleanup for our lineup will be Dave Walter to talk about the redevelopment of the former City Center site and talk about the advancements and the great work that he's done there. This time of year, it feels like a little bit of a back to school, what we did this summer report. And what we wanted to start with first and looking at was Fire Station 2, which is the gateway project for the bond. From this perspective, it shows the community room entrance and then the front side of that fire station on Canyon Drive. Next one shows the
Whoops, Mr. Henderson, I think you got muted for some reason.
Got it, thank you. I always wanted to have George Handley tell me I've been muted. It seems like that's a rite of passage here. So this looks at the fire station from the patio and employee parking entrance side. This really is a beautiful fire station, as you'll see. Next picture shows what would be on the left side of this picture is the community room that was promised. So this will become a great usable tool for our citizens, a really good sized room to look, but it also shows the really attractive front when facing towards Canyon Drive. Next picture is a picture of the bays at the fire station. 3 bays with the new bifold doors, not the roll-up doors. They're safer. Also, I think really attractive too. And Chief Miguel really described to me the diverse services that work out of this station. And this room and those 3 bays are really going to be able to fill the needs of the fire station at this area, you know, covering everything from the neighborhoods to the urban wilderness interface and all those things that this station needs to cover in that area, also with BYU programming. Next picture is an interior space. Much nicer than what they had, for those of you that toured that old fire station converted home. This is a wonderful new addition. We're looking kind of into the kitchen and the day room area. We are in punch list right now, going through some of the elements, and it looks like at this point we'll be doing a September 11th Patriot Day opening, and the chief and his crew will be moving in the week in advance of that. One thing that was really beneficial to me about this project was just working with Chief Miguel, Chief Hedman, and the entire fire team, learning about fire station construction, what are the necessary components, and then watching them spring into action now as they get ready to operate out of this facility. There truly is a science to what they do, and it's really impressive. Now we'll kind of move to the city center construction side. These pictures are a little less pretty, a little less glossy, but anytime you decide to build a building in one of the oldest core areas of Provo, you're going to find some surprises. We found 7 different structures and their foundations and footings at this site. We also found 2 swimming pools. I guess if you have a Parks and Recreation person running a program, there has to be swimming pools involved. We expected some of this, but not this much. And so we've got some pictures and some golden nuggets that we found along the way as we were digging into this site, because we had to dig down into the deepest footings level and to get the under the building parking. So the next slide shows one of those nuggets that we found. So this was pretty large. That's as taller than I am, you know, support for a sign and being able to pull those different elements out of there, and each one was buried to a certain level. So each one turned out to be a surprise as we went through it. Next picture shows kind of as all this concrete and foundations begin to accumulate. Next one shows some of the size of the pieces that we found. They works to piles. It seems like in the past when you did a facility demolition, you just drop the facility inside the foundation, put some topsoil over the top of it, and you called it good. So we are the ones that are clearing this site for those past ones that didn't quite get cleared out like they should. Another picture of the accumulation of concrete that we are taking to this, and it's something that, you know, we really had a great excavation crew, but these are things that do end up costing the project more, because since you don't know they're there, it's hard to cost for those items. So, you know, those were the things that we felt like we were getting hit with some of these elements on a day-to-day basis. So just when we get through all the concrete, then we moved in and we were high-fiving, thought we were out of some of these elements. Then we moved into what was our next surprise on the site. So in the next slide, it shows when we first discovered an underground fuel storage tank on the site. And you can see it just below the equipment as they're digging there. So just below that is an underground tank. So we ended up finding 4 total on this site with underground fuel and oil storage tank. They were unregistered, so we did not know they were there. The next slide kind of shows the 3 that were all in tandem right next to each other. So this is typical, and the next slide shows a typical 50s gas station site where they put the 3 tanks right together. They were mostly dry. So this required a call to state environmental immediately to be able to get those evaluated and get the interiors neutralized, even though there was some groundwater in one of them. So they had to bring in dry ice completely, get all the contaminants out of those, and then we were able to haul those off. Here's another picture with the perspective of the dig, how deep they were into the site. So they were getting very close to the bottom of that 14 feet excavation that we had to do to go down to the footings. Next slide is I guess how they retired underground storage tanks in the old days. This used to be an oil storage tank after oil changes. So instead of removing it from the ground, they filled it up with concrete and then called it good after that. So we were able to get in there. We had to take the steel skin off of that and then break off the concrete. And then we really felt we were doing really, really well at this point. We had been able to go through that and it had progressed really well. And I think the whole team was saying, we're all clear now and we're ready to start progressing on building a building. And just want to take a moment to say thank you to Dick Blackham, our facility services manager, who is absolutely a leader in the pack of coordinating all the documentation and the coordination to make sure we left our environment healthier than what it was when we started here, because obviously it had issues when we started. And we have now been signed off by the state. And quite frankly, that process was like a cat. It had 9 lives and we thought we were done more than once. And we finally got it to the finish line. But even after this, when we continued the excavation, if we move to the next slide, we started finding, even though the tanks had nothing in them, well, I think the reason that they had nothing in them was because they had leaked into the soil. So we found soil contamination. So we had to go through a complete mitigation to get all the soil cleaned up and taken to a site to get it cleaned, and also make sure we were protecting the groundwater at that area. All this was supervised by the environmental group. This is a picture of after that soil cleanup. And so this is the water table that's underneath our site at 14 feet. So that is some of our deepest elevations where we are digging in our footings and our foundations in that area. So this is where, if you look at the next slide, it really goes the conflict between and battle between concrete and water as you start digging in there, dewatering, and starting to pour concrete and footings. The next is another example of footings being framed and ready and poured, being able to mitigate the water right next to it. And we do have techniques now that dewater the site and move it so the building and the underground parking will not be in risk from any water. The next one shows an actual formed in concrete area where we're having to dewater before the pour of the concrete. And then this last one shows the shoring, how close the Covey Center, which is just to the left in that picture, that's the wall of the Covey Center, shored up by these supports, because the two buildings are going to be fairly close together. So we actually had the same water issue in the orchestra pit at the Covey Center. I was over that project also. And if those sump pumps go down, speaking of swimming pools, we have a swimming pool in our orchestra pit there. So the good news on all this, even with all this, our contractor is in budget and on time. And we are still on our target of a May 2022 completion of the building. And I'll move to Brian McBeth, who has a real-time tour of the current construction site that he'd like to show you.
All right, thank you, everybody. I'm going to share my screen and hopefully it comes through. Actually, here we go. All right, so this is actually a live, well, not live image, but an image that was taken right before lunchtime. We are actually standing right now in the council chambers. So I don't know if you can see the screen. It's a little small over on the far left, but we're standing pretty much right in the middle of the council chambers. kind of give you a view, they've started backfilling and getting this area ready for concrete. Over here, you can see the ramp that will be the exit out of the parking garage coming out onto Center Street. There, of course, Center Street, just to kind of give you some perspective. And just wrapping up the last little bit of footings up on the main level where you come in on the north side. Down in this area, just to give you a feel, we have started pouring slab on grade. This is down in the parking structure area, the underground parking. You've got the walls that are separating going up onto the main level. And then you can see some of the walls that have been poured. This is another exit out onto some public stairs. And that is where the drive approach is that leads out of the parking garage. Over on the east side, you can see that they're starting to form up walls, working towards the south. With over on the west side, they've got walls that have already been poured and working down towards that south corner as well. So for the majority, I would say we're probably about 95% complete with footings. And just working our way out to the south so that steel can start in September. So there's a quick view of where we're at on site. And if you have any questions, let me know. But otherwise, I will let it get turned back over to Brent.
Mr.
Chairman, go ahead.
Yes, go ahead. Sorry, you were muted for a second, but I unmuted.
Thank you. So I was just going to walk you quickly through the plans and some conceptual renderings of the different spaces so that you can now visualize the building as it goes up from where Brian had demonstrated we are currently with construction. So just moving on to the first slide. So we have this is a rendering looking from Center Street and 500 West, public plaza with the large signage that would be out in front that would be iconic. You can see the building. There are actually 6 different levels for the building. There's one underground, which you saw the slab has already been started for the underground parking. Then we come up to the plaza level. That would be the main level, and that would be the level where the council chambers would be located in the far left of the building in this image, and right off of the main entrance that you see here off of the plaza area. And then moving up through the different departments and to the 5th floor is what we call it, which is where the mayor would be located and administration would be located. Next slide. This is a view from the east looking towards the west. You can see the Covey Center on the far right. So we have in the foreground, you have public parking and a drop-off area. There is an entrance into the building on this side, as there is the majority of public parking is going to be off the east side. That entrance is kind of in the center there. There's a screened police patrol yard off to the left. It's a parking area that's intentionally screened from public view so that they can have the patrol cars in there and have quick access out of the building and quick response times. You can see the massing of the building. Let's go one more slide. This is from the same side of the building down at eye level, and you can see that entrance as you go into the building from the east. One thing I didn't mention in the previous rendering is off to the left of that entrance and down is a ramp that comes off of 100 South that will enter into that lower level parking area that is a staff parking area. Next. Just show you a few conceptual renderings of the interior space. We have off of that front entrance area, we have a community meeting room. That community meeting room is intended to be utilized by the community. It'll also be where we envision press conferences will be held if there are any city press conferences that need to take place, public safety press conferences and so forth would take place in this room. The plaza area that you saw on the outside off of Center Street and 500 West is just off to the right through these windows here. Next. This is actually the doors that you see straight ahead are the main entrance into the building from that plaza area. Off to the right, you see the council chamber entry and where you go into. And then you also see the stairs to the right that take you up through 4 floors of the building. And basically you can see all the way up through the building to all levels. And this stair translates through it. There's going to be a lot of daylight brought through this public space to enliven it. Next. This is kind of that same general area, but looking the opposite way. We're looking to the south after you walk into the building. So there's that same stair that you saw in the previous one. Off to the right is both the community meeting room you saw in the first image. The second entrance would be into the public safety area off of that lobby. Off to the far left, you see the wood surround there. That's actually an entrance into the council conference room that will be for city council and also for other public uses would be located there. Next image. This image is actually up on the 5th level, up at an administrative level, and the view that you would see from that location. There's an outdoor plaza area that could be used for hosting different events taking place there and providing outdoor space. Next. So this view is actually in the public safety lobby area. Looking straight through, and the glass doors at the far end of this space actually open up into that previous public lobby area. And the reason this is configured the way it is the public safety lobby will be a 24/7 operation, and it's locked off from the rest of the building so that others won't be able to walk through the city hall portion of it, but they will be able to come in here 365 days of the year, 24/7. So this is the public safety lobby area. Next. So this is a staff training area up in the public safety area. There is off the far side a small outdoor terrace area. So if someone's in all-day training, they'd be able to go outside, step outside and get some fresh air. It's configured for different types of uses and different types of training. It's also a versatile space in that the back wall is an operable wall that will actually collapse. And go to the next slide. And it opens up into what is the public safety break area, and so that it becomes a much larger area that could also be used for staff, all hands meetings and gatherings and public or social meetings that would need to take place. So we set that up as a very versatile space that would accommodate quite a few people throughout that area. Next. And these are just a little higher end rendering views. This is again down on the main level. On the south end of the public space, the east entrance comes in just right behind this view, and the public counter where the majority of the visiting public will interact with staff will be at this counter right here. And so similar to what you have currently in the City Hall lobby, where people come in, this is where they will have interactions with the staff and the clerical people. There are public restrooms that are located on each floor, but they're down on the far right-hand side. And then where the two people are coming out in that area, that's where the elevator lobbies are. There are 2 public elevators there that will service them. There is also a staff elevator on the back side that is not open to the public. And then over on the left, which is the public safety area, that also has elevators in that to service the public safety folks and their circulation throughout the building.
Mr. Tippett, we have
Yes.
from Ms. Ellsworth.
Yeah, about 6 months ago when we got a similar presentation, I raised a concern that users in this building who wear skirts or dresses would have a different experience on those floating stairs than those who don't wear skirts and dresses. So I'm wondering if there's some design modification that can be made to provide more discreet experience for those who wear skirts and dresses.
We can certainly continue to look at that. We did, after that comment, we did do actually a substantial amount of research on that and involved actually going out on site and looking at similar conditions. And although you can see horizontally here, you cannot see vertically through these stairs, the way they're configured. And maybe perhaps we could actually spend a little time with you and walk you through that and show you that analysis if you'd like.
Yeah, I'd be happy to take you to a place in town where you, where that previous architect has made that mistake.
We can have that conversation. We'd love to have it with you.
Thanks.
Okay, moving on, next slide. Again, this is on the opposite end of the public area, kind of looking up and down the hall. The public counter is down on the far left. Here's that stair again. And you can see we're doing accents. The space is intentionally very light so that it will reflect the light that's brought in, both from the south and from the north. And then we're accenting all of the major entryways with wood. So they are highlighted with wood. Next. And this is the council chambers area that you can see here. And that will be a fixed dais with a fixed background. The white area surrounding the Provo logo there, that's actually a non-transparent white glass product. So it is has a very polished look to it and high-end look. The ceiling will have some very interesting design interest to it. The windows will be able to be blacked out by window shades that will come down and drop down, and there'll be accents of wood around the entire dais area, as you can see there. Next. So this is how it sits on the site, and perhaps at this point, I know in the interest of time, maybe I'll leave it at that point. And if you have questions for Scott or Brian and I, maybe we can turn it over to you for any questions you might have.
Thank you, Mr. Harding.
Thank you, Chair Handley. I guess this is more, well, speaking to the administration, but also perhaps Mr. Henderson. Back when we were discussing preparing for the bond, there was some discussion about renaming our city center. I felt like, at least at the time, there seemed to be some general consensus. Maybe we didn't discuss it all the way through, but city center can be a bit ambiguous. I think just recently I got notice that the city center was being shut down for decontamination, and I would venture that more than half of our residents, if it, when they see headlines like that, they think perhaps downtown is being shut down, or at least kind of center and university, maybe that small area is being shut down. I know when I've talked with constituents and offered to meet with them at the city center, there usually is confusion. Quite often there's confusion if we're talking about the city offices, or if we're talking center and university. I don't think, I haven't been a part of that discussion since then. I don't think that there's been like a conscious decision to continue with city center or to change it to maybe city hall or even city offices. But I noticed with the renderings and whatnot, we have signage on the renderings that continue to say city center. And if I'm a minority and there's reason to continue with city center, if that's the decision, that's, I can live with that. But I just hope it's not something where the discussion never happens, the decision never gets made, and so it just ends up too late to make a change later on. Second thing, I think the Fifth West road project is planning to wrap up here sometime in the fall. And just looking at the renderings of the street out front, I think that there is kind of a window of opportunity here. There's been lots of discussion over the years, perhaps making Center Street more pedestrian oriented. A recent discussion, a recent idea was to move Center Street from 2 lanes to 1 lane to really encourage traffic to move to First North. I think we've got a window of opportunity here. If we wanted to put 2 left turn lanes from Center Street coming from the freeway to shift people up to First North at 5th West, I think now is kind of the time. And Mr. Henderson, this probably doesn't affect you directly, but just while we're on the subject, I wanted to bring that up again. I imagine that as we're building this facility, and perhaps the redevelopment we'll talk about later, we may need to use some of that street frontage for staging. And anyway, it just seems like now it would be a good time to make that shift. So I just wanted to put that bug in people's ears. And then finally, looking at the rendering of the customer service counter, it strikes me, I think that's a couple slides back. Yeah, thank you. It strikes me that that's a smaller linear footage of counter space than we currently have now. And so I'm just wondering, have we thought, or have we questioned whether that's enough counter space for our future needs?
I think as we looked at it with customer service, they set the number of counter workstations that they have. So I think this rendering shows that those workstations that they currently have are accommodated. It is definitely in a more linear format, less of a work around the corner like what they have now. But we feel like with some of the move of their responsibilities in other areas, I think this is what they came with, and the customer service was part of this process, the design process for their workspace.
Okay, we're almost out of time. Mr. Fillmore, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to add a comment or two from my vantage point as a member of the Citizens Advisory Committee on the City Center project. I can't tell you how impressed I am with the team that has been assembled for this. Our architectural firm is first class. Our construction firm is first class. Scott has done an amazing job. They're staying on budget despite a bunch of surprises. They're on schedule. They've been extremely thoughtful. I will tell you that every question our committee asks as we go through slides like this, they have an answer for. They've anticipated virtually everything. I couldn't be more pleased.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Fillmore, and thank you so much to the presenters. I'm sure if we have other questions, I know Mr. Henderson and others will be happy to answer. But let me just echo Mr. Fillmore's gratitude to you all, and we're grateful to get updated on the project, and it's getting very close and very exciting, and we're appreciative of your ability to meet complications and challenges along the way. All right, we'll move on now to our next item, which is a break. We are 20 minutes. We allotted 10 minutes for the break. I know it's kind of hard to break reasonably less than 10 minutes. So I'm going to just go ahead and have our normal 10-minute break, and we'll convene back at 3:50. I see Mr. Parker has a question. Go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We were anticipating that we'd give you just a very quick briefing on the status of the redevelopment portion. We have Dave Walter waiting. We can certainly do that after the break if that works better for you, but I think it'll be brief just to give you a quick status on the process and timing for the selection of a redevelopment partner.
Let's go ahead and do that, and then we'll take a break.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hanley and members of the council. So as you know, that we did submit our request for proposals We had 8 responses back. We went through them. We were very pleasantly surprised. We had 2 from Colorado, 1 from Oregon. So we were able to get a little broader perspective than we had hoped. And we have selected 4 of those, and we'll be asking them to come back and impress us with what their proposals are going to be. And we will be expecting those back at the end of October, October 27th. At that point, we'll be bringing those forward for you to take a closer look at. We'll invite those 4 people in. We'll invite them for a presentation and set aside some time for some questions and try to drill down into what they did. There were some pretty impressive resumes that were attached to these proposals, and we're excited to move forward and see what they have planned for Provo.
Wonderful. Thank you very much.
Welcome.
All right, we'll let's take a break, and just for the evenness of time, we'll say 3:50. So in 8 minutes, how's that? So we'll meet at 3:50. Thank you. resolution approving the Municipal Wastewater Planning Program Report for 2019 in accordance with the Utah Pollutant Discharge Elimination System Report. And this will be presented by Gary Calder, Water Resources Division Director. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Calder.
You're welcome. So what I have before you today, Council, is what has been described as the Municipal Wastewater Planning Program. This is an annual report, and that is required from the state. In 2012, Provo City, as well as all treatment plants, has a general permit with the state in which they require an annual report to report. It's a self-assessment report, and I'm not sure how to move to the next page. Can I have the next page? As far as that we supply to the state. This is a self-assessment report and is done on an annual basis. This permit basically is for us to review with you as the council, as well as the state, for the collection of wastewater and to develop the programs necessary for the prevention, the control, and the abatement of new and our existing system. The next page, please. This report is done or completed, as I mentioned, in-house. Jimmy McKnight, who's here in the Public Works Department, does the financial aspect of it. And then our treatment plant is completed by our plant manager, who is Mark Ogren. And the collection system is filled out and completed by Chris Wright, our collections manager. So we are getting firsthand knowledge from the three individuals that deal with our wastewater right from the beginning on this report. Okay, next slide. One of the primary concerns of the state is the overflow of our wastewater system and to make sure that we have adequate capacity on that system. And so that is the purpose of this report, is to report that. And I am proud to report that in 2019, where this report is associated with, that we have had no overflows or any spills that are reported or that we need to report to the state. So we have a very good track record in 2019. Next slide, please. This is a picture of our crews out working, maintaining our system, working in an effort to make sure, to assure that we do not have any overflows. And that is a daily job that these gentlemen are doing. Next slide, please. What we show here is part of that maintenance. On the top right corner, you can see that we have a broken pipe. This broken pipe could have been a settlement in the trench, poor quality pipe. It could be from a root coming through a crack or a joint in the pipe. That pipe has been cleaned. The next slide down, you can see we have been able to go in 12 feet down in the ground, sometimes hundreds of feet away from a manhole, and put in a pipe patch. And that is part of the system that we have, is maintaining our system and making sure that we are only treating the water that we need to, and that we have a good maintenance program for our system. Next slide, please. What you can see here is that Provo City is broken into several different areas that we maintain, we monitor. We have put this into a model that we are looking throughout the entire city and actively, not in just one area, but throughout the city. We have smaller areas that are concerns as well as bigger areas, but we are on a daily basis monitoring the flows, and then our crews are out every day working throughout the city as far as maintaining with that goal of no spills and no overflows. Another thing that I am proud to report is that at our plant, we had no violations this past year. So our report that we are giving to the state is one that I'm very proud to mention. And then if I could go to the next slide. This is a memo that we gave to the council a couple of years ago. This is a result of a lot of hard work as far as we monitor and model the areas of the city. that we are, this is what I would say, a map that changes as the capacity or as growth happens. But the green area is where we have no significant capacity issues. The yellow is we have some minor areas. Orange, we have some major areas. And red, which I'm sure you're aware of, we have no capacity yet. We're actively working on improving these areas in the orange and as well as the red. We have a very aggressive system, especially on the west side, but you can see the orange area near the mix that we're working on, as well as down in the Ironton area and the golf course area. So these are all areas that we are working on to change that from orange to green or to yellow. But we are taking this report from the state. We are sharing that with you as far as helping educate you as far as what we are doing, but also it's the effort of a lot of hard work from our collections crew and our plant that we're able to tell you that we have fulfilled the obligation of that agreement that we have from the state in 2012, that we are continuing to fulfill that agreement. I will say as a side note, when we did go to the state for our loan that we were looking to help us finance the plant, one of the items that they looked at was, are we fulfilling this agreement? And I'm proud to tell you that we did. And that's one of the reasons of why we were able to get as good a rate, in my opinion, because we are fulfilling the obligations and the requirements the state's asking us to do. And so I'm not sure if you've had the opportunity to read through the report, but if you have any questions regarding that, I'm here to answer that. I'm also presenting this same item at tonight's meeting. So if a question comes up, you're welcome to ask me now or later with time permitting.
Thank you, Mr. Collier. Mr. Harding, go ahead.
Thank you. I think this is my 6th annual report, having, that I've read through. And I could be mistaken, but I think this is the first time that there have been 0 reportable incidents on either the collections or the plant. Usually there's 1 or 2, just as it's a very large system. I can't remember, it was 200 plus miles of collection pipes and whatnot. So let me just commend your team on an excellent year with 0 reportable incidents. I think that's just wonderful. And thank you for your good service.
I'll let our crews know. I appreciate that.
Please, thank you. I think my only area of concern came in the finance side of it. Parts 2 and parts 3, operating revenues and reserves and capital improvements revenues and reserves. There's a lot of no's there. Where we're asked questions like, are the projected sewer revenues sufficient to cover the, I think, OM&R, I think that's operations, maintenance, and replacement for the next 5 years? We have a no there. Does the sewer system have sufficient staff to provide proper OM&R? Also answered no. I think 5-6 years ago when I first saw this report, I believe the answer was, well, that's answering as of now, but right now we have some fairly aggressive but gradual rate increases with the hope that we can get to a sustainable spot. Are these answers of no? Does that suggest that we're not at a sustainable spot? And if so, do we have is the plan that we're following now going to be able to get us into a sustainable position?
I believe the reason we answered no was because of the fact that we are asking the state for a loan, because right now we do not have that money in the bank, but that's why we are requesting a loan. And yes, in the future, we are hoping that we are on top of that, but that is the reason, in my opinion, why we answered that in that direction. Because if we would have said yes, they would have come back and said, well, why are you asking for a loan? And so that's why we answered it the way we did.
Okay, thank you. And in a kind of a related spot, and this probably is more speaking to the council's policymakers, but there was one other no answer that kind of caught my attention. The question is, do you have a water and or sewer customer assistance program, which I believe is similar to like the heat program that our natural gas utility provider offers? My understanding is a customer assistance program gives an opportunity for customers who would like to donate into a fund that is used to help low-income customers who can't meet their sewer bill. You know, if you can't pay for their sewer bill, can apply for some relief using this customer assistance program. Because we have been increasing sewer rates, perhaps that is something that we want to take a look at and maybe provide to give an easy opportunity for the many generous people of Provo to kind of look out for each other as our sewer rates continue to go up.
I would support that. I will say that we've been very flexible in helping people that are having issues or problems. And I think that's evident in probably from the feedback that I'm not sure what you hear, but what I hear as far as us helping people out that are having problems. So I think our crews do an excellent job as far as helping the general public with concerns. Yes, we don't want to do everything free, but we do, in my opinion, help out those people that are in need.
That's good to hear. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Calder. I'm sure if we have other questions, we can ask again this evening. We appreciate your presentation and all your good work.
You're welcome.
All right.
Appreciate it.
We'll move on then to item number 5, which is a presentation from the Utah Transit Authority regarding the impact COVID-19 has had on their services. This will be presented by Kent Millington, member of the UTA Board of Trustees.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to the council for just a few minutes. There's 2 major issues that I want to cover. First of all, there's an issue that has come to my attention just in the last couple of days with the status of the medians with our UVX system through Provo. The medians seem to have been overgrown now recently with a lot of weeds rather than the plants that we had. And so they are unsightly right now. But I want you to know that issue has been addressed. We're working right now with the contractor, Kiewit Clyde, to get that resolved. We were approaching a resolution with this problem last October, and then of course the winter came on and it wasn't such a big issue. Then in the spring it became it was interfered with because of the COVID-19, and so the attention has been drawn away from that. Right now they're overgrown with some unsightly weeds, and that whole issue is now being resolved. We have been meeting with not only the Provo city officials, but also with Kiewit Clyde to address this issue. I'm told by our people this afternoon that we expect within the next at least 2 weeks to have that resolved, to have, we've got a crew out there now addressing that, taking out the weeds and making sure that any plants that need to be replaced are replaced. And we get a final review before we turn that entire median section back to Provo City. And we will work with the city very carefully. I think the name of the gentleman is John Bunderson, if I have that name correctly. But we're working to solve that problem with the unsightly medians that are in your city. But I wanted to address that right up front so that you'll know that that's something we're working on. We're solving that problem. We're aware of the problem. and we want to make sure that it gets taken care of. So that's the first issue that I wanted to raise. The real reason that I wanted to address the council is to give you a report of the transit operations as a result of COVID-19. Now, you may know that prior to COVID-19, in the early part of March, system-wide, we were carrying about 160,000 people a day on various systems, whether they be buses or trains. By the first part of April, when we made the adjustment to all of our schedules, we were down to just less than 40,000. Or in other words, we were down about 75% in our ridership. Now, since then, we have seen a slight increase in the probably last 60 days. Last week, our ridership was averaging just over 52,000. So we're back up from the low. We're nowhere near the top. We're still down very significantly in our total ridership. Specifically in Utah County, some numbers that you might be interested in. The UVX system back in the early part of March was carrying about 13,500 people a day. Then, of course, the schools closed. Everybody began to shut down, and we dropped from that 13,000 level down to about 2,500. And we've maintained the 2,500 pretty much constant through that entire time from April until just about 2 weeks ago. Now, with UVU and BYU opening up, we have seen a bump in ridership on the UVX. For example, last week we averaged about just over 5,000 riders a day with UVU opening back up. And the only day that we have to measure on so far with BYU is yesterday, but we were at about 6,200 riders yesterday. So we see some increase. Again, we're not anywhere near the level we saw last year, early part of this year, late last year, but we do see some growth. I was actually in Provo this morning at the South Campus UVX station, passing out masks. And we saw a number of the students arriving, and we were passing out masks for the students that had not only the UTA logo, but it had BYU's logo on it. So we were trying to encourage the students to take advantage of the UVX ridership. Another system that you might be interested in is the Route 850, which travels right down State Street. And that ridership was about 2,500 pre-COVID, down to about 1,000 after the first part of April. But this last week, we're back up to about 1.9 thousand, about 1,900 riders on average now. So we do see some slight increase in ridership coming back with the opening up of the schools and the ridership there. Now, a couple of things that actually we had to implement as a result of COVID-19 was the hiring of a significant increase in people that were cleaning the buses and trains. And we have made a very significant effort to clean the buses and trains consistently through the day and especially overnight to make sure that the vehicles can be as safe as possible. Another thing that has happened, a very interesting thing happened. We kind of anticipated that the revenues would drop significantly, that the sales tax would hit us. You're aware that most of our revenue comes from the sales tax increments. And we thought that the sales tax would drop as a result of COVID-19. They actually have not. They have been very flat from throughout this entire time. Now, our fare box revenue has obviously dropped because the ridership dropped significantly. But the revenue from sales tax has held very steady. An interesting thing that we have seen is that the Salt Lake County sales tax has dropped slightly, but the northern counties, especially Weber and Davis County and Utah counties, have held very strong. With people working from home, they're not traveling into Salt Lake where they're buying things in Salt Lake County. So their revenues have dropped a little bit. The other counties have held pretty steady. So our UTA revenues from sales tax have maintained a good solid level, but the fare box revenues have dropped quite substantially. Now that's the report that I wanted to give you as a result of COVID-19. We've increased our expenses a little bit because of the cleaning, the necessity to clean our vehicles, but we're seeing ridership begin to come back a little bit. We'll be anxious to see how that improves throughout the fall if schools are able to maintain being opened. I'm available for any questions you may have on either of the topics, either the median issue that we're trying to resolve very quickly now and get that cleaned up in your city, or in the ridership area.
Thank you, Mr. Millington. Any questions? I'm curious to know if there has been, if you have any data on mask wearing on the buses, any sense of willingness of people to wear masks on the buses.
Early on, we recommended that they wear masks. Now we are requiring that they wear masks, and we make masks available in each of our buses and trains. And so the masks are available. We encourage people who are not wearing masks to avail themselves of one of the free masks that we're handing out. That's part of the reason we were handing out masks today to the students with the BYU logo. And last week we were doing the same over in Orem for the UVU students. But we require the masks to be worn, and we make masks available to those who are not wearing them.
Thank you. Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, just so you mentioned there's increased cost and expense associated with cleaning. Sales tax has stayed fairly flat. Fare box has gone down a little bit. Give us an idea of where that puts us overall. I mean, what overall is there additional revenue beyond what was expected because of the sales tax piece, even after the cleaning and even after the fare box decreases, to look at expanding routes and doing other things, or does it put us behind because of those additional expenses?
We are very, very close to what our budget was projected to be, even though the fare box revenue has gone from about $4 million a month to about $1.75 million a month right now. So it's been a couple of $1 million. However, because we cut back on the service that was offered, we were able to eliminate some of the overtime that we had built into our budget. And so that was taken care of. And also because we're not traveling as many miles, we've reduced the amount of the cost in diesel. And so we've largely been able to cover the increased costs by the adjustments that we made in our operations as a result of decreased ridership. It's just about even in that regard. Now, not entirely, and we're a little behind, but you may be aware that the CARES Act that came from the federal government earlier this year, UTA was allocated $187.5 million as a result of the CARES Act. We expect that money to then cover the shortfall for the next year or two, actually. So very significantly, we have not been able to, not had to eliminate any of our operators. We have the same number of operators. We're moving, I think, pretty judiciously financially. So we feel like we're pretty solid based on the savings we saw, even though we had some increase in the cleaning expenses. So we think we're pretty good in that respect.
Other questions for Mr. Millington? Ms. Ellsworth, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just curious if there's any information on potential route changes for UVX in Provo City.
For UVX?
Yeah, there's been some an upswell of citizens who are interested in a new UVX stop, and I'm curious if that's
Along 9th East?
Yes.
Yes, just east of the new music building for BYU. Yes, we are looking at that very carefully. We have some plans already being drawn up for placing a stop along 9th East, just right by where the music building will be built. So that plan is in place. I've actually seen some drawings of how that stop would look along 9th East. So there is that one change that is being contemplated.
Okay. Any idea what a timeline for something like that would be? Or is that internally driven and not driven by UTA?
Well, it's also driven by how the need for space along that 9th East for the construction to take place in the building. It'll be probably fairly consistent with the building, though we might be able to get that 9th East stop built before the building is actually completed. But we've got to work that out with BYU and with the city to make sure that we're not building something that then has to be torn out because of the building requirement. So we're working very carefully on that, but we are expecting to have that within the next year to 18 months is what I have heard.
Thank you, Mr. Millington. With regard to that, I think there's interest in, at least I represent that district that includes both the BYU campus and the neighborhood that's east of the campus.
Okay.
I think when it's ready to be presented and discussed with the community, I think it would be very helpful.
No question about that. I've seen some drawings. I don't know the exact status of it today, but I know that that's moving forward and the planning is being made. We'll certainly make, before we do anything, of course, we'll present that to the community so they can have that community input.
I think one thing that will be, in addition to whatever design plans are presented or any sort of financial implications for the city, it's not entirely clear to me whether this is purely an administrative decision that would be needed or whether it's both legislative and administrative. In either case, I think we'd like to have that conversation with the community, but and maybe we need to sort of sort that out as we get your plans and begin to wrestle with its implications to know what the best way for us to make a formal decision on it would be.
Well, Mr. Handley, I'll make a note of that specifically, and I'll make an inquiry of our planning people, find out where it is, and I'll let you know the status of both the plans and what may be necessary as far as approvals, legislature and city and university and everybody. I'll let you know the very latest on that.
That'd be great. I would very much appreciate that.
Yes, be happy to do that.
All right. Any other questions for Mr. Millington? We appreciate your efforts and we appreciate the efforts with the stops that you mentioned and for sharing your information and your time with us today. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you for allowing me the time.
All right, we will turn now to item number 6, which is a resolution to place 0.207 acre parcel of vacant land at 1320 South and east of 1080 East on the surplus property list and to approve a real estate purchase contract for the sale of city property for residential development. This is presented by Tara Riddle, our property coordinator.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you. Just a few weeks ago, we discussed the progress we were making on getting this property put under contract. Just as a quick reminder, this property was surplus last year, and we've been working diligently with a developer that we selected through an RFP process. And I think we're getting closer to finalizing that deal, and I think you'll be pretty excited about what we've come up with. If I can get the next slide. While we were reviewing this property for development, we did discover a few issues that I just wanted to bring to your attention. On the north side of our property, we found that there was a little bit of a property overlap. And also on our neighbors to the east, their west property line had some overlaps onto our property. So we have corrected those. So that has adjusted slightly the overall acreage for this property. Very insignificant, but I just wanted to bring that to your attention. While we were looking at the development, we also had a discussion with our power department about the future of the substation. And they feel very strongly that the footprint that they have that's outlined in this drawing in a fence is all the property they're going to need. So they would like us to surplus the property that's located just to the south of the substation and include that in the overall development agreement with the Livingston Group. So that's the surplus property that we are discussing this afternoon. It's a 0.207 acre parcel, and it will be used for landscaping, possible overflow parking for the development, and it'll also provide a drive approach for the substation coming in from the south side. Okay, can I have the next slide? So based on our previous discussions and the council's desire to see a different housing product, we worked really closely with the developer and gave them some general guidance of some different housing products that we'd like to see done on this property. If you'll recall, we went over these during a study session a couple of weeks ago, and these are just some ideas of the finishings that they would like to use and the different house fronts. Can I have the next slide, please? Also, during our last discussion, I misspoke. I indicated that the properties up on the north side were single family houses, but those are actually twin homes. So this proposal will have 5 twin homes, so 10 units. They are listing them at about $310,000. And there will be 8 single family homes. And the estimated list price of those is $375,000 to $399,000. Can I have the next slide, please? So I want to go over quickly some of the key points that we've discussed previously and where we've ended up with the developer. As you'll recall, we asked the developer to upgrade the design and the finishes. And they estimated the cost for those upgrades would be about $200,000. The original proposal was to do a cost sharing approach for the upgrade. So they wanted us to reduce the cost of the land from $360,000 down to $260,000, which worked out to about $1,400 and change per unit. So this would be almost a 50% split with the cost, with the plus part of that following on the development group. After further discussion with them and with other staff members, we agreed that it may be better for the city to be paid as the units are sold. So we'll actually be carrying the cost of the land rather than them having to get financing to cover the cost. What that means to us is that we can actually then increase the price per unit. So instead of looking at $14,500 per acre per unit, we're looking at about $30,000 per unit. So we'll be making $540,000 on the project while not taking any cuts in the finishes that we've asked for. So I think this is a real plus for us. And this is something that we've done before on some other projects that we've done with developers. And I think it's beneficial where we can make, quite a bit of money on the property while still getting the finished product that we're desiring. So on the action agenda tonight, we're seeking approval for the resolution to surplus the additional 0.2 of an acre and then approve the real estate purchase contract with the value being set at $540,000. So do you have any questions?
Thank you. Any questions? Yeah, go ahead, Mr. Shipley.
Yeah, is there any timeline associated with the contract where the builder would have to pay us within a certain amount of time, or is it open-ended on when they sell?
So it's just open-ended when they start selling the units, but based on how things have been selling down in that neighborhood, I have no doubt that they'll be selling quickly.
Mr. Fillmore, you're muted.
This is a very creative effort on your part. I suppose the only risk is if the units don't sell, right?
Correct.
If you had a couple of units, then the city ends up shorted. But what is your confidence level that it will sell out in this particular location?
Well, I think just looking at how the townhomes have sold and also the condos, just introducing this new housing type, I think is a real positive. So I feel very confident that these will sell.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? This will be coming back up tonight. All right, thank you, Ms. Riddle, for your presentation and for your effort on that. We'll look forward to the discussion and vote this evening.
Thank you.
We'll turn to our last item on the session agenda, if I got that right. Item number 7, and an ordinance amending the zone map of approximately 3.5 acres of real property generally located at 1487 West, 990 South from agricultural A1 to one family R110 in the Sunset neighborhood. And this is going to be presented by Aaron Ardmore, City Planner. Thanks for being with us, Mr. Ardmore.
Thank you. If you can go to the next slide, John. There we go. So you see the property highlighted there. It's currently agricultural land on the edge, the southeast edge of what is the Kelshaw subdivision, where Century Homes is building some single-family homes. If you go to the next slide. So currently it's agricultural land with residential to the west and public facilities for Footprinters Park to the south. The general plan for this area, as you can see, is residential. And if we move one slide again, you can see the kind of overall vicinity plan. Most of this is a concept, so you can see the Kelshaw Lane through the north up to 600 south, and it comes down to 1600 west. Homes are starting to be built there by Century Homes. The project we're talking about is highlighted in the red square. This zone change is proposed R110, 10,000 minimum square foot lots, which meets the general plan and the future land use plan for the area. The highlighted parcel in red is the preliminary subdivision that they'll move forward with if this zone change is approved. They only want to subdivide one buildable lot right now, and the other lots on the cul-de-sac would come at a later date. I think that's all I have. Planning Commission recommended approval, unanimous 8-0. Want to know if there's any question you would have for me for now or for later tonight.
Mr. Harding.
Just a clarification. So is the rezone request only for the red rectangle or the red outline?
It's for the red outline, so they wouldn't have to come back when they choose to further subdivide the property.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions for Mr. Ardmore? All right, well, if there are any further questions, I'm sure they'll come up this evening. We appreciate your presentation, and that will
Thank you.
conclude our time for our work session. We will reconvene at 5:30 p.m. For our evening session. So thank you all for being with us.
George, you may need to officially adjourn by unanimous consent. Oh, he may have already logged off.
I think you're okay to go ahead and just end the meeting.